Today we're discussing the biggest traps in relationships. I wanted to talk about this topic because if you're anything like me, you have experienced the complexity and nuance and tendency of relationships to create tremendous problems in our lives. And as we move in this direction of becoming more conscious and trying to create the good life, it pays to educate ourselves and become aware of some of the pitfalls that might be lying in wait on the path ahead. Now, obviously, relationships are one of the core components of living the good life, and they're incredibly complex. It's so easy for us to get stuck. There are so many ways they can go wrong because they're involving other people. And other people have completely different set of agendas to us, different psychological structures, different ways of behaving, different history. And if we want to move in the direction of building healthy relationships, as I advocate, as a cornerstone and pillar of a conscious and fulfilling life, it pays for us to educate ourselves and become a bit more wise in this direction. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing how studying and looking at relationships through the lens of examining the traps that exist in this domain of life can help us to move forward in a much more conscious way. I want to discuss a number of the personal traps that I've fallen into in my life experience so far and in my relationships. And I've put together a comprehensive list of over 50 of the biggest and most common traps that I see people falling for. And I myself have fallen for many of these traps. And I also want to give you guys some practical steps and insights that will help you to avoid falling into many of the worst traps yourselves. So let's start by understanding and laying a bit of groundwork by looking at what are traps in the first place. So if we look at life and the structure of reality, we can see that many organisms actually advance their survival agenda through misdirection, through trickery, through various forms of manipulation and exploitation of others in order to get what they want. We ourselves can be guilty of trapping others to advance our own agenda, and we can fall prey to the traps of others just as easily, if not even more easily, if we're not wise. Like the way that many animals lay traps in order to snare their prey, like a Venus flytrap, for example, is a great analogy for this idea of traps, how it seduces and creates this tempting nectar or fragrance that it puts out there into the atmosphere, and that entices a fly or a bug to zero in and look for the source of this delicious smell, only to find that when it reaches the treat, anticipating this beautiful meal at the end of it, boom. The trap snaps shut, the jaws of that plant close and slowly squeeze and poison the helpless bug. And traps in the human domain often work in very similar ways. So in order to understand this more deeply, we're going to look at the psychology and understand the nature of how traps in the human and especially in the relationship domain are functioning, so we don't end up like the fly caught in the Venus flytrap. Now, in order to understand the psychology behind many of the traps that we'll be examining and looking at today, we need to understand why this is occurring and what are the motives, what is the underlying mechanisms that are at play psychologically. And very much we can see that in the relationship sphere, we have this social game that is occurring. We have needs, desires, wishes, and expectations that we are looking to fulfill as a part of our survival agenda. Finding a mate, having children, getting sex, having interpersonal relationships in general. Most of the relationships that we have in our life are a function, or exist, in fact, because they satisfy some of our needs. Otherwise, why would we have them most of the time? It's a very selfish perspective, and of course we are extremely selfish. Being in this human form, having to survive, we are primarily invested in and very, very hungry to fulfill our survival agenda by any means necessary. And we can easily throw our morals or any sense of right and wrong out of the window if it means that we get what we want or get what we need. A casual look around at the world and you'll see that people go to extraordinary lengths to get their needs met. They will manipulate, they will lie, they will deceive, they will abuse and exploit people to no end in order to get what they want. So already within this is this huge potential for things to clash in a certain way, because in order for one person to get what they want, they might have to take it from someone else. And this is especially the case in the area of relationships and sex, because we have this very deep, instinctual, animalistic drive with the whole weight of evolution behind us, pushing us forward, driving our survival and adaptation in life. So if you think you are above that or somehow immune to that, you're absolutely not, and that is a huge trap to fall into. So obviously, in studying this and examining this as we'll move forward into specific examples, this is going to give us a lot of insight into the nature of how these traps are functioning. It's going to potentially save us years or decades of life, time and energy, if this can help us to avoid some of the worst traps that I'll be talking about today. So I hope you can appreciate the profundity and value and significance of studying this. And as a man who has made his fair share of blunders and massive mistakes and fallen into many, many, many traps, I can attest to the value of understanding this at a deep level. And it's only through my tremendous mistakes that I became interested in looking at life and relationships through this lens, because I saw what an unconscious approach produced for me and resulted in, and those were some very painful lessons. And I'll talk more about that soon, so stay with me. And it's also important to understand that there are various different stages of traps. There's obviously traps at the beginner level, like the noob traps that we can easily just fall into because we're extremely naive, we're starting out, we're young, we don't have the benefit of time and wisdom and maturity and hard-learned mistakes. So it's very easy to fall into the newbie traps, as you've probably experienced in various different ways. There's also intermediate traps, and there is advanced traps. So even once we get through the initial stages of our education, we have a number of experiences, that's not the end. We can get caught and make mistakes and fail or fall flat on our faces at any stage of the journey in relationships. Therefore, becoming wise now is a pursuit that will pay for itself if it can help you to avoid some of these major blunders. So with that said, let's dive into the list. And I've compiled a pretty extensive list here. This is by no means exhaustive. I'm sure we could add many, many more to this. And I definitely encourage you to build on this and take this further and examine for yourself and become aware of ones that I may have missed. So the first trap that I have is ignoring red flags. As we enter relationships, obviously there are all manner of warning signs. And if we overlook what we can identify as being red flags, problematic behavior early in the relationship, because we're in a state of denial, or we are caught up in that infatuation and desire for this other person, or we're simply ignorant, we don't even know what red flags are or what to look for, this is a huge trap. Red flags exist for a reason. There are some fundamental principles in relationships that if we ignore those, we are begging for trouble. And actually, as I move through this list, this will be a pretty comprehensive list on things that could potentially be red flags. And as I move through this list, understand that a trap is not necessarily black and white. The things that I'm going to be sharing are not necessarily like a binary thing. It is a trap or it's not a trap. Traps come in shades and degrees and nuances, and it's often too much of one thing or not enough. There's traps on both sides of specific issues or specific principles, as you'll see as we move forward. So the next trap is trying to rescue people, or having this fix mentality, trying to be a savior or a white knight, especially when a partner or potential partners have significant personal issues and we go in there and try to save them rather than encouraging them to seek professional help or walking away from the relationship altogether when it's the case to do so. This can be a huge trap. Financial imbalance in a relationship can be a major trap, allowing a certain significant financial disparity between you and your partner to create, as it often does, power dynamics or dependency in the relationship. Or if there is like lending of money or giving of money in this sort of situation, this can lead to resentment building over time, frustration at this somehow imbalance or inequality on the financial level in a relationship. Money in general is an area that is extremely trappy, and perhaps I'll do a future episode on this. I don't want to dive too much into it today, but money in general is an area where obviously we have a lot of investment. It's a very charged, sticky, easily corrupted part of life. that holds many, many traps. Poor conflict resolution skills is a huge trap. Conflict in general, not knowing how to approach and resolve conflicts in a relationship. This can get you into major, major traps. Failing to be able to resolve the kind of disagreements that inevitably arise in relationships and actually find a healthy, constructive way to repair. If you don't have that in your relationship, you are in for a tough ride, which is what so much of my work is around and supporting. It's something that has completely changed the nature of my relationship and a lot of the men that I've worked with. And that's why it's such a potent area to sharpen as a skill set. Settling for someone out of a certain fear of being lonely can be a huge trap. So staying in a relationship which isn't satisfying or it's unhealthy because you're actually afraid to be by yourself is a huge trap. Staying with someone out of a fear of their well-being, feeling somewhat obliged to stay in a relationship because you're worried what will happen to them. I've experienced this in my life and I've seen it in many situations with friends. They're in the wrong relationship or the relationship should have ended a long time ago, but the connection somehow lingers on because of these fears. Worried about too much about what the other person will do, where they will be in their life without you. In general, moral obligation, any kind of obligation can be a trap. So we need to be careful with that. It's actually their responsibility, their life. And if we're compromising ourselves and our need for perhaps a different relationship or no relationship, this is not a good excuse to stay in a relationship just because you're afraid of what will happen to them. So addiction to drama is the next trap I wanted to discuss. Either yourself creating or staying in very tumultuous or toxic relationships because on some instinctual core level we have this addiction, unconsciously of course, to the highs and lows, this Romeo-Juliet, anxious avoidant kind of dance that gets played out in a lot of immature or undeveloped, let's say, relationships. I've been with women who were extremely dramatic and had to create drama in order to feel like there was passion in the relationship. And man, that was exhausting. It was very unhealthy, extremely draining. And it's not worth it. It's a trap. It's a big trap to stay in that. You want to be in a relationship where you get to feel safe, secure, healthy. You don't need excessive drama in your life. The next trap is a lack of personal growth and development. So if we neglect other areas of development in our life and expect the relationship that we're in to be the sole source of fulfillment and growth in your life, this is a huge trap. We actually want to be in a relationship that is balanced and healthy and supports us to go out there and experience other parts of life. So next is expecting a relationship to make you happy. If you think a relationship is going to solve all your problems and bring a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life, and you're relying on it to do so, instead of figuring that stuff out before you find a relationship, this can be a trap. Of course, a relationship can fulfill those roles. It can make you happy, it can solve a lot of your problems. It can bring a deep sense of meaning in your life, but that does come with some trade-offs. For example, if the relationship is threatened or if it ends, your source of meaning and happiness and purpose in life will be ripped away from you. And that puts a lot of pressure on the relationship because you are holding it as this beacon. Your whole life is about that relationship. I hope you can see that this exposes you. It's like a liability, because the truth is that most relationships don't last forever, like for your whole life. No relationships last forever, but for your whole life, it's pretty rare. In fact, most relationships end sooner rather than later. So holding that relationship as the thing, your sole source of happiness and your deepest meaning in life, this is a huge trap. Because chances are it's not going to be that way forever. Communication misalignment can be a major trap in relationships. I see this in coaching a lot, where couples are failing to align in their ability and styles of communication and the frequency that they're on, which leads to all manner of misunderstandings, a lot of frustration building, and major resentment over time. So that's why conscious communication skills and relationship skills in general are super important to invest in, so we can deal with that and navigate those tricky waters. People come from very different backgrounds. We have very different psychology. We love to assume that people see the world in the way that we do, and they function in pretty similar ways to us. But as you mature and as you get exposed to more and more people in your life, you see that humans are wildly different, and they can view reality and view the world and communicate in radically different ways. And if we barge in there and have this assumption that they're going to communicate the way that we do, you can quickly find yourself struggling and in a huge trap with that. Social isolation can be a major trap. So allowing a relationship to create a lot of space between you, your friends, your family, and other social activities to insulate, like you're cocooning somehow. And this leads to a loss of support networks in your life. That's a trap. This is especially prevalent when couples have children. The world that you're living in contracts massively when you have kids. You no longer have the same freedom. You no longer have the energy to go out and do stuff, to nourish connections with friends or engage in social activities. And that obviously does have an impact on you as a person, and that can be a trap to fall into if you're not careful. We can see that in a certain sense as well by men who get whipped, like caught somehow. Men, another way of saying it is like that guy is on the leash with that woman. She's got the leash wrapped around him, and he doesn't hang out with the boys anymore. He doesn't go out. He just stays at home and spends all of his time with her because she's so possessive of him. It can be a trap, right? Not setting boundaries with things that have an external influence on your relationship. So letting factors like in-laws, your parents, friends, or work find a way in to somehow influence your relationship, and not having a clear somehow container around the relationship that you have to protect it from external influences. That can be a trap. Jealousy and possessiveness can be a pretty sticky area, very trappy. Allowing jealousy and possessiveness to basically erode the trust and freedom within your relationship. You have a jealous partner, they are insecure about you having friends of the same gender as them. They possessively hold on to you and, make you the sole purpose and focus of their life, and then you find your freedom severely restricted because they're afraid of what happens if you leave and go outside and talk to other people or things like this. That can be a major trap. Staying for the wrong reasons in a relationship, so remaining stuck out of an obligation or convenience because it's the comfort zone, or you're afraid of things changing, rather than actually staying in that relationship because of the genuine connection that you have and the love that you feel. That's very common. I've been guilty of this one, of staying for the wrong reasons, not leaving because I felt somehow stuck, obliged, comfortable, even though there was a part of me that was yearning for freedom and feeling severely restricted and manipulated in my relationship. It's a big trap. Unresolved past trauma. So bringing unresolved issues from your childhood, from previous relationships, or earlier stages of your life, dragging that with you into your current relationship, which will inevitably affect the dynamics between you and your partner. Extremely common, by the way. There is a whole push that we see these days, and it's amazing to see that people are becoming so informed about the nature of trauma and how that affects us, and how we bring so many of those patterns with us from the past into the present, and they play out with the person that we're with. So if we're doing that unconsciously, that can be creating a vast majority of the relationship problems you're experiencing. So we really want to be working to resolve those patterns, those coping mechanisms, the traumatic symptoms that have been suppressed for so long. We want to find a way to deal with that in a healthy way. Not to say that we need to have it all perfectly figured out as we come into a relationship, because a lot of those patterns will be healed through the relationship and the safety that we're able to create around those triggers. But we don't want to be unconsciously projecting all of our trauma onto our partner, or allowing them to do that to us. That's obviously not a good recipe. Imbalance in the amount of effort that we're putting into the relationship and investing in this other person. If one partner is consistently putting in way more effort than the other, this is obviously going to lead to resentment and an imbalance in the relationship. And if you are in that position on either end, you should be able to recognize, and hopefully you can recognize, that that's a problem, which is going to severely undermine the integrity of the relationship and its potential to continue at some point. That's actually a red flag. If one person is investing a lot and the other person is meh, not treating it so seriously, that is a warning sign that you should avoid, or have a serious discussion about that. Unconscious projection blaming others, pointing the finger, instead of really seeing what the other person and their behavior and the situation is revealing about us, and then taking responsibility for that. That's a major trap that we all fall into. I have fallen into it. I still fall into it on occasion. It's so tempting. It's so easy. It's so much more comfortable to blame them, point the finger, see their flaws and their patterns, instead of looking inwards and having the humbleness to admit our mistakes, or to look at our unconscious patterns and what that means about us, and then taking responsibility for those and then resolving them. It's so much easier to just blame and unconsciously project our stuff outwards onto others. It's just so common. So we want to be aware of that. We want to see that tendency existing inside of us, and we want to understand it in others as well. And that's like a bit of a cheat code into relationships once you understand that. And it's not about shutting it down. It's just about seeing the mechanism that's at play. Because you will never stop everyone from projecting on you, but at least you can take responsibility for your projections. And that's a powerful place to start. Having unrealistic expectations is the next one. This plays out in various different ways, but a couple of examples is women just expecting men to know without them having to communicate. See this all the time. Natalie and I were talking about this the other day. She hears a lot of women expecting men to pick them up or buy them certain things or gifts or flowers or whatever, and then getting upset because he didn't do that. But she never communicated her desire, which makes it kind of unrealistic. It would be nice, and if you have that desire, communicate how amazing that would make you feel, how much you would love to receive this, to be picked up, to be taken here, to be taken out for dinner. Women have a certain tendency to project this idea of the perfect man, this man we see in Hollywood movies and romanticize about, and to expect men to conform to that expectation, and then blame them and shame them and judge them for not doing so. But we are not mind readers, right? We don't necessarily have the same ideal. We don't necessarily know. And then a woman might say, but if you were a real man, then you would know. This is unrealistic. We are all a work in progress. We are all working to develop ourselves, various different ways, of course, and hopefully we can be more forgiving and patient and help each other learn the best ways of loving, giving and receiving love. Men, on the other hand, often have unrealistic expectations about sex, expecting a woman to give sex in exchange for taking her on a date or giving her a massage or buying her a beautiful gift. It's very easy for men to fall into this trap because that sexual desire is so prevalent and strong. We've also come from thousands of years of this being the case. Women feeling somehow obliged socially to give men sex. And hey, we're in the 21st century and it's no longer the case. Just because you behave nice to a woman does not mean she is obliged or you can expect her to give you sex. This is a ridiculous assumption. Or to equate something like paying for dinner with sex. This is completely different quality or different value of exchange. And to look at it transactionally like that is unrealistic, to say the least. The next point I wanted to make is dating potential instead of seeing the reality. It's very easy for us to get caught up in the ideal of the other person, the words and the story that we create, this romance, instead of actually looking at their actions and the facts, the truth. Humans actually have a tendency to avoid the truth, and that's a huge trap. We would rather live in this illusion, this fantasy, than make hard decisions and admit the truth and break up or move on or create an uncomfortable conversation about those things. Women are very susceptible to falling for this one. Dating a man's potential and staying with him because of his potential instead of actually seeing the reality of who he is and what he's capable of, and trying to force him to change or wait for him to change, and then manipulate the situation in certain ways for him to become the ideal that she has in her mind or is longing for in her heart. That's a huge trap. We shouldn't date the potential. We should see the reality of the person and make our decisions accordingly. Becoming dependent, enmeshed, or codependent in a relationship is a huge trap. Obviously, anytime we are, as an adult, putting ourselves in a position of dependency on someone else, we become completely enmeshed, so we lose our sense of individuality and our separate self and our freedom, our autonomy, our sovereignty, because we are just losing ourselves in the relationship with the other person. This is called enmeshment. That's a huge trap. You don't want to be in that position. It can lead to a lot of problems, having this kind of codependency. Neglecting self-care in a relationship. It's so easy to get caught up and swept up in the romance and the connection and slowly make sacrifices and lose access or lose connection to things that make you happy, things that make you feel healthy, things that make you feel full. You no longer spend time with your friends. You no longer do your hobbies. You stop putting your energy into your personal stuff, taking time by yourself, going on retreats or going on different workshops, things that interest you, educating yourself, because everything becomes about the relationship and those things fall away. It's a trap, because at some point you'll turn around and you'll feel empty, frustrated, or if the relationship ends, you are left with your hands in your pockets and nothing to show for it, instead of honoring your commitments and following your deeper purpose in life. A fear of vulnerability is a huge trap that I see a lot of people, especially men, falling into, having this fear that vulnerability makes you weak, that the woman will leave you because you're vulnerable, because you show your tender side or reveal your heart. It's a huge trap, because you're basically sacrificing your authenticity and who you really are and the truth that exists inside of you, your most intimate stuff. If you let the fear of that censor you, you're giving into fear. And that's not a healthy pattern to set a precedent with. We want to have courage. We want to develop the strength to be vulnerable and the confidence and belief and trust in ourselves in order to reveal what's inside. And hopefully we can learn how to do that skillfully in a relationship that supports that kind of expression. You want to be in a healthy relationship where you can be yourself, right? Unequal power dynamics is a huge trap that I've fallen into, allowing myself to be in a relationship where I put my partner on a pedestal and was in an inferior position in relation to her. Huge trap. Unequal power dynamics leads to all manner of potential abuse of that power. As we know, power corrupts. Power over others does us no good. You do not want power over others, nor do you want others to have power over you. This is violating one of the foundational principles of a healthy relationship and life in general. That power comes with a tremendous cost, and it will enact that cost in due time and erode the genuine, heartfelt connections in those relationships. And it violates this principle because fundamentally, every human is sovereign. No human is more or less than another. Of course, we can have tremendous differences, and a wise being makes space for that and gives up this desire to control or manipulate others. Take that away, throw it away. This alone is a lesson that we need to learn, and you learn it the hard way often. I've been in a position of power over others, and I've given other people power over me, and it's extremely corrosive and corrupting. It does no favors to your ego. It does no favors for your spiritual development. It's a trap. Compromising with relationships because of urgency and time pressure. Settling with someone because you want to have kids, because you feel like at this stage of your life you should have a relationship, your friends have relationships, you're the only single one. And so you find the first guy or girl that comes along that ticks a few of your boxes because you need to have a baby. Because you're 30 something and you haven't had a baby and your biological clock is ticking, or all of your friends have girlfriends and you're the only single dude in the village or the town that you live in. So you settle. You compromise. You choose someone who isn't right or has red flags or doesn't meet your standards. And that's a huge trap. It won't work well. That will come back to bite you in time in various different ways. The next one is having tunnel vision. So we have this fantasy of the one, this perfect person, that there is this soulmate, this twin flame out there who is our ideal partner and no one else. And we project this incredible pressure and expectation and create this very elaborate story around our romance as being something that no one else has ever experienced, that I will never experience. If we don't make this work, it's over for this lifetime until we find each other in the next life. Or if we don't make it work with her, then we will never find anyone as good as her. Not like that. Massive illusion and trap to fall into. The world is full of people. There is nearly 4 billion people of the opposite gender on this planet. There is millions of people that you would match with on most of the levels in many ways, and that you could potentially have extremely fulfilling, long-lasting, deep, intimate relationships with. You need to be realistic and look at it from a numbers point of view, and don't get swept up in this fantasy of twin flames and creating this kind of unnecessary pressure on the relationships that you have. The truth is, you can find other people, you can find other relationships. If this one doesn't work, it will be sad, you will grieve, you will learn some hard lessons like this, but you will also move on. There will be others. And sometimes that's the best. Sometimes that's what you need. Even if a relationship fails, it doesn't mean that it was a complete failure. You still learn a lot through relationships that fail, and sometimes you learn the most through your relationships that fail. Some of the biggest lessons. Falling for superficial attraction, status, money, beauty, the things we see, the shiny objects, the stuff on the surface. It's a huge trap. That's like the deep sea fish, the angler that has this light bobbing around in the darkness that other fish are drawn to, like, oh, the light. And they start coming towards it only to find this beast bearing down on them, catching it in its talons and claws and sharp teeth, sucking it down into its belly. The promise of the light can often be just an illusion. So too these shiny objects like money and beauty and status. It's like the flashy exterior, and underneath is a corrupt, morally empty, emotionally bankrupt person that will suck the life out of you, or pull you into a world that doesn't resonate with you, that has no deeper substance or meaning. Infatuation, falling, getting the giddies, this honeymoon stage of a relationship in general can be very trappy, because it brings with this urge, this desire, all of our hope, our patient waiting, our careful planning, our time in loneliness, in isolation, longing for this deep connection to appear, and finally it's with us, and we go weak at the knees. And in doing so, we ignore all of the red flags. We don't see into the deeper qualities of the person. We don't look at the compatibility, the fundamental compatibility or incompatibility in the connection that we have. I've had quite a few number of men in my men's group reporting this trap for themselves, getting really swept up in a girl. She's the one, this is amazing, I'm going to marry her. They start planning the wedding and picking out names for the kids, and then 2 days later it falls apart. Or she is with another guy. Or all manner of things can happen, you know? So not getting ahead of ourselves and not getting lost in the rush of the energy of the beginning. That's just wise. A wise way to approach relationships, and you learn that through experience, making that mistake a number of times, and hey, hopefully you learn to not get too excited. Not developing emotional intelligence is a trap. I did a whole episode recently on developing emotional intelligence. If you haven't watched that, listen to that yet, definitely go back and look at that. It's super important, foundational, a pillar of developing your capacity to understand humans and yourself in relationships. Not developing, maintaining, and honoring your boundaries in relationships, massive trap. I made these mistakes for many years, not even knowing what boundaries were, or especially guys on this nice guy end of the spectrum or nice girl end of the spectrum have a deep susceptibility to override their boundaries and to not be able to enforce any manner of boundaries, which basically the gates of the castle are open. The invading army can do whatever it wants. Not being aware of your needs in relationship. Your needs are a core driving force and motivator for having relationships in the first place. So if you're not conscious of what your needs are, how will you request them? How will you articulate and communicate around them? How will you know if they're getting met or not getting met? You need to make them explicit instead of just unconsciously trying to get them met. I made this mistake myself, and after many, many years and numerous relationships of not having a connection to my needs, I saw the necessity for that. And as soon as I started advocating for my needs to get met, my relationship got way better. I stopped tolerating things that were disrespectful, harmful, out of alignment with the kind of relationship that I was looking for, and I started creating the healthy, vibrant relationship that I have now. It's core. It's a core thing, core principle there. Not being aware of your standards can be a massive trap, so just very connected to this point, but really zoning in and making explicit what kind of relationship you're looking for. What kind of person do you want to be with? How is that dynamic going to look and feel between the two of you? Are you aware of that? Have you thought about that in advance? Do you have standards? Are they conscious standards? Are they explicit, or are they just assumptions? Somewhere buried deep in the recesses of your mind. Not understanding human developmental stages can be a massive trap. This is a big topic and something I'll be exploring in a lot of depth as we move forward, but understanding that humans go through various different stages of development throughout their life, and we exist with very different stages of development depending on the amount of work that we've done, the culture that we grew up in, the education that we've received, the amount of life experience we've exposed ourselves to. All of this contributes to a level of development, and there are various different stages that you should be aware of to know where you are first and foremost in your own development, and then you can accurately assess where other people are. If you're a highly developed person and you end up getting sucked into a relationship with a person at low stages of human development, you're in for a rocky ride. And it's worth understanding that and being aware of that. That is wisdom and maturity right there. Getting involved with people who are mentally unstable or have brain conditions that you don't fully understand. This is something that is becoming a lot more prevalent these days as people are more and more comfortable expressing their neurodivergence, neurospiciness on the spectrum. This is becoming more and more understood. And not to say that you cannot have a good relationship with someone who is on that spectrum or has limitations or quirks or conditions. But there exists the potential there for a lot of traps if you are with someone and you don't really understand how their brain functions, because it's different to yours. They might have a very different way of relating, a very different connection to their emotional experience, very different levels of interpersonal skills and intelligence. And that's something to be aware of. If you go into it naively and blindly, it can be a massive trap. Can be. Doesn't have to be. And I know people and have friends who are in that category of people, and they do have healthy relationships. It's not always going to be a trap, but it can be. Getting involved with people who are severely traumatized, addicted, abusive, or criminal. Major trap. I don't think I need to elaborate too much on this one, but I have been with people who are severely traumatized. I've been with people who are addicted to drugs. I have also been addicted to drugs at earlier stages in my life. I've been with people who were abusive, and I have been abusive. Not physically, but emotionally. Criminal, obviously, being with someone who is engaged in criminal activity is going to put you in a very compromised position. There is a certain tendency there to get sucked in to that survival strategy. A low stage of human development. Can be an extremely damaging and costly trap to find yourself caught in relationships with people like this. And I myself have paid the high price for not seeing those red flags and allowing myself to be pulled, staying in relationship with severely traumatized and abusive people. And that was a big trap, and I learned things the hard way. Better to have a zero tolerance policy and to love from the distance and to not engage in a very intimate kind of relationship with people who are in that delicate and tender, sensitive state. Because it won't do you good, and it probably won't do them very good either. Getting involved with people who have severe chronic or terminal illnesses can be a major trap. Not to say that you can't have beautiful, meaningful, deep relationships, but there is obviously a reality there that you might not be prepared for, or living in an illusion or ignorance of a certain truth, which is you might lose that person, they might die soon or next year. You might have to support them and put your life on hold in order to take care of them. And you'll feel morally obliged to do so if they are getting sick and you love them. Not to say you can't do that, but you should be prepared for the demands of that situation and not go into it blindly, because that would be a trap. Getting involved with people who have radically clashing worldviews can be a very difficult thing. Obviously, it will create a lot of conflict and opposition, as each of you may find the necessity to fight to defend your worldview and pit it against their worldview. If you're a Muslim or you're a Christian and you start a relationship with a hardcore atheist, you're going to be up for some interesting conversations. And that might affect the foundations of your relationship if you're not careful. Being aware of this is important. Generally, it's more rare that we actually really find affinities with people who have wildly clashing worldviews, but it can happen and you should be aware of that. Getting involved with people who are in cults or who hold radical religious ideologies. I myself have been in a cult, have been guilty of being radically ideological myself. So I learned that lesson the hard way. That's a whole different topic and a very deep topic with a lot of nuances and a lot of psychological mechanisms and epistemological errors, which I'll be definitely making episodes on in the future to go deep into this, because it's one of the biggest life lessons that I've had so far, which taught me a tremendous amount about myself, about reality, about spirituality. But being aware that humans have a tendency to become very ideological. At certain stages of development, you can easily find yourself falling into cults, becoming a cult leader. And if you have relationships that are entangled with people in cults, or you create situations like that, it can be extremely tricky, extremely sticky, full of traps. Much wiser to avoid, and unfortunately sometimes we need to learn through our mistakes, and I certainly did. So there is a silver lining there. I'll talk about that in a bit. Now I want to discuss an entire category, a couple of really important categories that stand out to me in this domain of relationships that are extremely susceptible to traps, and getting married is the first one. So whenever we're involved in a legal financial commitment that is also coupled with romance and an interpersonal relationship, a romantic relationship, obviously this provides a lot of opportunities for things to get messy. It creates a financial exposure, especially if you are the person with more assets, more money, especially if you are the man, because the family court system and the legal system at this stage typically favors women in this regard. There are certain binding commitments, till death do us part, we're really committing to something significant when we marry someone, and people don't generally take it as serious as it really is. They're not going into marriage or looking at this commitment and this stage of progressing in the relationship with a keen sense of how it could go wrong. And because of that, so many people find themselves getting absolutely fucked. There's intense legal implications. There is intense financial implications. There is emotional implications. If there are kids involved, obviously that is an extremely complicating factor. If divorce at some stage occurs, that's not something we usually plan for, because it's not sexy, it's not romantic, it's not comfortable to talk about what happens to the marriage if it doesn't work. Nobody talks about that shit beforehand. Very rarely. And yet something like 50% or more of people find themselves in that situation. So there are so many things to consider within the institution of marriage and the implications that that has on your relationship and the future of your relationship. And it doesn't take a very wise mind to look at the situation and realize that there is an incredible potential for things to go wrong. You have friends, no doubt, who have got divorced. You yourself may have been divorced once before. You know it's a thing. So don't be naive. Don't be stupid. Don't walk into it pretending everything's going to be fine and it's going to be happy ever after. You have a serious responsibility, especially if you have children involved, because there is the potential to wound and traumatize them in an incredible way. I myself have been the child in a family that went through a messy divorce, and it marked me, for sure, to see my parents become enemies and fight each other legally and financially, and move towards a very wounded, resentful dynamic. Of course, that impacts the children. The fact that you have children with someone that you have become estranged with, that you have had to go to court with and battle legally over the children, over the finances, who gets the house, who takes the cars, this kind of stuff, that is rife with traps. So you're a fool if you don't think about it beforehand and you don't consider the potential outcomes of the endeavor that you're engaging in. That's the whole point of this episode. And hopefully by now I'm convincing you to take this more seriously. Because I have seen many people's lives ruined and severely impacted by divorce. And even relationships ruined just because they got married. It put a lot of pressure and stress and extra expectations on the relationship that they weren't expecting, they weren't prepared for, and it blew up. The next area I want to talk about, which is a kind of umbrella for a whole vast array of traps, is simply getting sexually involved with anyone. This is an activity that exposes you to a vast array of traps as well. Unprotected sex, which leads to unwanted pregnancy. Sexually transmitted infections can occur. Paying for sex. Revealing your fantasies, your kinks, exploring kinks with another person. Going into the whole dom-sub direction. This whole issue of consent. This grey, murky area that is like one of the trappiest things in human relationships, is this area of sexuality. There's a reason we see sex used to bring down politicians and CEOs and famous people. As soon as someone gets hit with an allegation of some kind, their reputation is ruined. All it takes, 20, 30, 40 years of building a reputation and building a career for yourself can be ruined in a day. It can be ruined in one social media post. And if you are naive enough to think that it won't happen to you, you deserve to get caught with your pants down. Literally. So things like photos, text messages, videos that you take or get taken of you are all liabilities. They expose you to the potential for blackmail and extortion. I've seen it happen multiple times to people I know. There is a extremely damaging exposure socially around this topic of sexuality. This can create legal exposure. You're not even safe from the police in this regard. Sometimes you get caught between criminals trying to exploit you or blackmail you and the police, who are also trying to entrap you and catch you for doing something naughty. You can get caught in all manner of weird situations. You can get caught in a kind of honey trap with prostitutes or people that you pay for sex or that you have some kind of arrangement with. This can easily turn south, can go down, can become nasty, can become vindictive. Not to mention that when we make love with someone, we're exposing our emotions, our heart in a certain sense. We're mixing our energies in a very, very intimate way, which creates a tremendous amount of attachment in a very short period of time. Feelings get involved, expectations get broken, people get hurt, and then seek a validation of their pain through revenge. It's extremely common. Events that were experienced in a certain way now can be misconstrued later and changed into something else. This whole idea of consent, when is it consent? When is it not consent? Was it yes? Was it no? When did it become a no? When did you stop enjoying it? Did you say anything? Did you not say anything? It's extremely complicated. This whole realm, especially when it goes to court and gets caught up in legal proceedings, financially draining, emotionally damaging, socially devastating. So stop being naive and look at it with the maturity that it deserves. We treat it so casually, and yet within it is wrapped up some of the juiciest and most destructive traps in the human experience, because it's so connected to our deepest desires, our darkest fantasies, and our core needs of being validated and feeling loved and satisfying ourselves on that level. It's like evolution is driving us to want it and crave it and need it. And at the same time, it's so rife with potential for things to go wrong. So it's an extremely potent area of traps, and you should be aware of them. If you don't, there's a good chance that in your lifetime you'll fall for some of these traps and learn the hard way. So that's the list so far, and now I want to talk about some practical strategies for avoiding these traps. I'm sure you can think of many others as well. First of all, we really need to stop being so naive. We need to become aware that these traps exist in the world, and we need to start creating a connection to them and seeing these examples in real life. You need to look at yourself and examine yourself and see where you've made mistakes in the past. You need to look at others and look at the traps that they are falling into and learn lessons from them. This is why it's such a wise and powerful lens to look at domains of experience in life through it, because it helps us to avoid some of the most time-consuming, energy-consuming, and life-consuming mistakes that we can make. Step 2 is to understand that your vulnerability to traps rises exponentially when you are needy, desperate, intoxicated, or taking risks. So we need to be careful. If you're getting drunk, if you're taking drugs, if you are feeling lonely, and you do something out of the norm, you let your frustration build to the point where you snap and you go to fulfill that need in a certain way, that is a risk. So we need to be careful in those moments when we find ourselves in those kind of states of being desperate, needy, intoxicated, taking risks. This is where we need to be very lucid, very careful. Step 3 is enhancing your interpersonal intelligence. We need to develop emotional intelligence. We need to develop our relational skills with people. We need to learn how to communicate effectively. We need to understand our needs, boundaries, feelings, standards in relationships. What are our non-negotiables? Where are the lines that we will not cross, or we will not let others cross? And how can we communicate around that in an effective way that leaves both people or the situation left in a healthy way? So there's no hard feelings, there's no lingering resentment, there's no unresolved trauma or conflict. The better we get at that, the more we invest in those skills in ourselves, the less we'll find ourselves creating the kind of relationship traps that I've talked about, the easier we'll find ourselves navigating potential traps with the people that we're close to. The better we understand human psychology and human development, obviously the less susceptible we're going to be, the less naive, the less caught off guard. Step 4 is developing your state of consciousness, because the more conscious you become, the less likely you are to fall for traps. We need to expose ourselves to massive experience in life and to learn consciously, looking at life, looking at the situations and domains of life that we're entering through as a learning experience. That's what we're here to do. We're here to understand. We're here to learn. We're here to grow. And as we grow and become more conscious, you're going to stop falling for the newbie traps. Then you're going to stop falling for the intermediate traps. You will see these things coming, and hopefully we can insulate ourselves against the advanced traps. That's going to take a long time. That's going to take serious commitment, serious work, but it's worth it. It's very worth it. What else are you going to do in the time that you have here? Step 5 is learning from your traps and the mistakes you fall into so you don't make them again. If you find yourself falling for the same trap again and again and again, at a certain point you're going to get sick of hitting your head, and hopefully you will wake up. The suffering we go through from failing and from making mistakes and from falling into traps actually gives us the most profound lessons in life. Especially if you're smart about it and you self-reflect and you see the mistakes and you think about it, you contemplate it, you journal about it, you actually do the work to integrate the lessons. The idea isn't to live in a state of constant paranoia, worried that we're going to fall into traps. Never stepping outside, never risking anything, never taking a leap. But it is rather to walk into situations, to walk through life with open eyes, with a sense of maturity and trying to develop wisdom. this is going to lead us in the right direction. Some of the best lessons in my life, the most powerful, insightful, transformational things that I've learned and experiences that I've went through were fucking traps that I fell into. So we don't need to demonize traps in general. The suffering that I felt through fucking things up woke me up. It hurt so badly that I was forced to get really humble, admit my flaws, admit my mistakes, admit that I was wrong. And that was a huge step. That moved me closer to being right and doing things in better ways, because I learned through my terrible mistakes. So the point is not to avoid all traps, it's to become more conscious. By looking at traps and the traps we fall into and the challenges and the mistakes that we make, and gradually learning, evolving, growing through the whole process. And obviously, hopefully in time we start to become more mature, we stop falling for the silly ones, and we level up, we become more astute and aware, and we start learning through different experiences instead of repeating or looping in the same ones. It's useful for us to really study this area of relationships because it's one of the core components of building the good life. It's one of the most important parts of our life. It brings so much meaning, so much fulfillment, so many of our needs get met through the relationships that we have with others. We're going to be relating for the rest of our lives. So it simply pays for us to invest and become more conscious of the potential pitfalls that we can fall into, the areas we need to be aware of, the nuances of relationships that can keep us really stuck and limit our growth, impede our development. And as we develop mastery in this realm, and we become wise and mature and well developed on the relational frontier, this sets us up with a precedent. It gives us a skill set. It makes us more intelligent. And that's going to better prepare us to see and approach the other domains of life, whether that's business, society in general, personal growth and development, spirituality, money. And we'll be able to bring this lens of wisdom and study and the massive experience that we've accumulated through all of this work, and we'll approach those domains with much more awareness and in a much more mature way. And like this, we slowly expand, our life becomes better, we start integrating and building the various pillars of the life that we want to create, and that's going to lead us somewhere. Over time, it's like an investment that we're making. We're building up the investments. And the best parts of life, they take time to mature. They take time for the compound interest to start building and paying dividends. So I hope you see how valuable and useful this can be. I hope you're enjoying this content. And in terms of homework, I can give you a few avenues and points to reflect on yourself, which is to first and foremost ask yourself the question and journal on this topic of relationship traps. And you can ask yourself, what relationship traps have I fallen into so far in life? Which ones did I get caught with? And what did I learn from them? And how can I avoid them in the future? Powerful question to ask yourself. You can then ask yourself, what relationship traps have I seen others falling into? And what can I learn from those? We don't just want to learn from our own experience. We can learn from others. We can look into the past. Doesn't need to be in the present. We can go back in time. And lastly, we can ask this question: what relationship traps am I particularly vulnerable to? And how can I avoid those in the future? If you do the first few questions of this, by the time that you get to this last question of asking what relationship traps you are particularly susceptible to or vulnerable to, this will bring you some powerful insights. As I was journaling and contemplating on this topic, I was doing these journal questions and really looked back and saw some amazing patterns emerging from the biggest mistakes and the traps that I've fallen into in relationship. I saw that those traps were repeating in different ways, and that I have a very big vulnerability on certain levels to repeat those lessons in the future. And that's powerful insight. That's very useful, but that's very, very tangible, because I see a part of my character and my development which is exposing me to the liability of falling for specific traps. So if you do these questions, set yourself half an hour on the phone as a timer or an hour and sit with these questions and really get a pen and paper and journal and write these down and see what you come up with. I'm sure you will find some useful nuggets and insights by doing this practice. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel and support it as I grow this thing. I'm really excited to be offering this and to be finally teaching in this way. It's been a long time coming, and I've got some really great feedback from the content that I've created so far. I'll be building these episodes for many, many years and potentially decades to come. So I'm really excited to go on this journey and to use this avenue of teaching as a way to deepen my own understanding and to share my insights with you. So I really, really, really appreciate any support and feedback that you guys are giving me. If you want to take this work deeper and get more support around this, you'll find the links to my courses and my one-on-one coaching containers that I offer in the description below. And lastly, I want to leave you with a few insights if you've made it this far. I really appreciate you sticking with me this time. And I want to share two of the biggest traps that I haven't talked about yet, which are in fact relationships themselves. Firstly, not taking relationships seriously enough is a huge trap, which can truly jeopardize the quality of your life. Healthy and deep, intimate relationships are a pillar of a meaningful existence, and they require your investment and education and commitment and dedication to studying them, getting support, really investing in therapy, coaching, serious education, and building and investing in the relationships that you have. That is a huge area of life that is so worth focusing on. And so I see so many people not taking this seriously. We spend the partner that we have, we spend literally like thousands of hours and days in intimate connection and sharing a life with them. You might spend 50 years with the person that you're with, so you better be careful who you choose, who you stay with, and develop your skills to be able to navigate the complexity and the challenges and the traps that you will inevitably face as you move through life together. If you don't, you will lose the connection. The relationship will fail. Stuff will grow between you. You will stop making love and end up in a sex relationship, or you'll get divorced, or you'll, become estranged in various ways. And that's a huge shame, because the deeper you go with someone, the better it gets. So we want to invest in our relationships like it's one of the most important parts of life, because it is. And the flip side of that is perhaps the biggest trap of all, which is getting too caught up in relationships, such to the point that we actually lose connection to the ultimate pursuit in life, which is to awaken and to discover absolute truth. Because relationships are so seductive and give us so much comfort, and they're complex, it's very easy for us to get distracted and spend our entire lives spinning around, orbiting various different people and nourishing those connections and having children and all of these things, that we actually miss out and we forget that there are deeper levels and that it's possible to actually transcend the human experience and discover what is beyond the structures of our finite self and our ego mind. And that's a huge trap. If we go all in and focus too much on relationships, we can miss out on the best, most profound, most meaningful parts of life. And that kind of takes us into non-duality and the spiritual perspective, which is a vast topic, so I'll save that for a future lesson. But simply consider that relationships are a core component of a great life, but they are by no means the whole thing. So don't fall into that trap. All right, that's it for this one. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Looking forward to your feedback. In the next episode, I'll be talking about the spiritual insights that I've gained through losing my father and seeing him pass away. A lot of profound understandings have unraveled from this experience for me, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys as a very potent topic and tool for us to understand one of the most profound topics that there is, which is death. So stay with me, hang in there, and I will see you guys in the next episode.